the tabs like config, screens, controls, and rules. So the config essentially is a set of controls for putting together some of the configurations which you would use within your the design canvas. So it could be your controls, what would be the spacing between each of these controls, the palette you would use, the kind of font you would use within your application design. Coming to the screens essentially has a list of screens put out here, which are in the consideration for the design. Right now, there is only one screen called Screen 1, but on clicking of the plus icon here, the system asks me what sort of screen you want to create as a second screen. Now, it gives me an option to create something which will deal with data collection, something with the workflows, something with presentation, something with the report, or it could be simply an empty screen. Now, the point is this selection of certain screen types would enable the system to present to me some pre-populated controls within the screen, which will help me or guide me to design my particular required screen pretty quickly. Now I will choose an empty screen, and what I do is I create, but it'll ask me for the screen name, so I will put this as sample screen 2. Now this will create a screen for me on the interface here. Now what do we have? We have screen 1 and screen 2. Now, if we switch back to the screen 1, let's see what other options are there as a part of the tab which we were going through already. Now, after screens, there is an important section called controls. Controls are all the UI controls which are required for populating onto your screens, which will actually give the ability for the developers to design the input and output actions for the users. Say, for example, the controls essentially have two types of controls here. One is the visual controls, and the other one is the form controls. The visual controls are the controls which are required for the purpose of consuming the data or viewing the data which is fetched from various different sources. We'll come to that a bit on what are the sources available for the data to be consumed. Now, now you can see different types of controls like the navigation menu. There is paragraphs, there's headings, there's subtitles, titles, there's a spacer, there's a table. This is the most important control because this will help you display the set of values for any sort of a dashboard or listing, or any sort of a list could be implemented onto the list control here. Now, there are also charts. These are pretty important too because there are requirements, or there would be requirements for your application design to contain a lot of charts and visual representation of your data in terms of various different charts. That's about visual controls. Now let's go to form controls. The form controls essentially are your controls which would either seek input from the user, or it could also be used to display output to the user. Simple input controls like your text boxes, email boxes, you want to input the name. Now, there are numeric controls, selections, say, for example, the select bar, the toggle text, or the keyword box, or a date picker. And also there's important controls like, the action button or submit button, which needs to be added onto the screen. We'll come to that on how we actually use these controls. There's also a section for native controls like the signature and file uploads. So these are the controls which will interact with the operating system of the phone and essentially help you, record your signature or upload a file from your existing file system of the phone. We also have controls pertaining to units like weight, distance, area, etc. Right, so this is about controls. Now, let's come to the main canvas here. The main canvas essentially looks like a representation of a mobile screen. This will help you, visualize how your application would look like, as in when you keep dragging and dropping the controls onto the screen here, right? So now let's see what are the options available on the screen itself, right? There is an important section here called the header, right? The moment you click on any of the controls or the screen itself, or possibly the header, there is a section on the right side which is called as a properties section, wherein you can configure certain values and certain options with respect to whether you want the header to be visible. If it is visible, what's the background color you want the header to be? Say, for example, I want it to be blue, gray, red, or a simple green. There are also options on choosing the gradient colors as well. Now, when you do that, the next option would be on to configuring certain navigation options on the header itself. Now, as you see on the right side, there are two navigation options given, so as on the left side. Now, how do we control these options? These options could be controlled on the properties section by clicking the section called left icon. So when I've clicked on the left icon, I can either choose to enable or disable this control. If I choose to enable this control, I don't like this icon. Say possibly I want to incorporate a icon which represents home, so I just incorporate this icon called home, right? So now when I say home icon, I need to basically define an action. When the user clicks on this particular icon, where should it actually lead, right? So there are options like, you lead them to put in the phone number because you want to do a click to call action, or an email interface to open up the default configured email client, or it could be an external URL which you can submit to, exit the application, submit to a DronaHQ's URL, or it could be navigating with or without validation to some other screen which is built within the application. So let's say, we exit the app, just the default control right now. There is also a secondary left icon, which is the icon of a user here. So I'll choose to disable this. I don't need two icons on my screen. For the rightmost icon, I ideally choose this to be, say, this is a logout kind of an option. So there is this icon for logout. Let me have this logout icon. Here also for this, I will define the action as, say, exit the application. So when I do this, I would rather not have two logout icons. So the secondary right icon, let me disable it. So I have two icons on the header right now for me. The most important thing right now for me is to define what's the name of the screen. So if if this is a simple application for leave management, just say leave management. Okay, and you can also configure what's the subheading. So enter leave data. Okay, a simple configuration of what the screen is all about. Now that's about the headers. Now we can start populating the controls from the control section onto the screen by dragging and dropping. Before doing that, there are two options given by the screen canvas here. One is to create the screen called empty screen, or it could be, if you already have a database and a schema developed or written, you could directly import that schema in terms of the controls, so that this would act as a front end for your existing schema, and you can immediately publish that application without having to do much customization. So I don't have any schema written right now, so I'll create an empty screen, and this will ask me for the screen name. So I will say this is leave data. Okay, this is the screen name for me. Let me say leave data. I save this. This is important because the leave data or the name of the screen essentially becomes what you see on the header by default. If you don't choose to have these, you can go manually and edit this data like I'm doing right now. Let me just put in a space here uh, and say enter leave data. Okay. So now coming back to the screen, so by default, a submit button has gotten added to us or to the screen when we define this as an empty screen. Now we'll see how to define that action which we would take on clicking of the submit button. But first, so this is considering this is a leaf management kind of an application. So you would basically have to ask the user on what kind of a leave they would want to avail, right? So let's look for some controls which actually can be used for such purpose. Say, for example, if it's a simple drop down, which I want to use. So if it is a drop down, so the moment I drag and drop this control onto the canvas, this canvas gives me on the right hand side an option to control all the properties pertaining to it. So the properties could not only be on the colors or the size of the pixel, but it also most importantly, gives me the unique name of this particular control. Right now, by default, it says it's drop down, but let's name this to what we need this to be. So this is select leave type, right? So when you type this, it automatically formulates a unique name for this control. It also gives me an option to copy this to the clipboard so that I could use this when I develop a logic to use the input which has been provided by the user on this particular drop down. Okay, so we'll come to that in a bit. Now this is selection of the leave type. So once you have the selection done, then you would basically have to put in date pickers, say, from and to. So it's from and to dates. Yep. Now, just a simple interface, there are a lot of things you could do in terms of half day leaves, full day leaves, all of those could be added as logic. So just for us to know what this platform is capable of, so I'm adding some simple controls for the representation. Right. We have three controls. Now, the idea is to first and foremost populate these controls from the data given out by some specific sources, right? In the ideal scenario of an enterprise, this data might come in from, say, in the form of a static data, which can be hard coded, or it could be from an API, which is from their HRMS system or leave management system or any such system which the enterprise have for managing the leaves of the employees, right? Now, there is also an option given by DronaHQ's low-code development platform called Sheets. Okay, Sheets is a local database or a database which is bundled along with the platform, wherein you could look up the data from the sheets and directly populate your controls by a click of a button called a function F here on top of each control, and then adding certain formula here to fetch the data from those sheets, right? So we'll come to sheets in a bit. So let me talk about the formula here. Now, since the drop down essentially contains a list of items, now if I don't add anything, there will be static data called option 1, 2, or 3, and 4, which I don't want. So I will have to create a formula or possibly use a formula called lookup, and which is the most prominent formula which we have because this is the one which we'll use for populating many of our controls from the sheets. So lookup essentially helps you derive the data from your existing sheets. Now, I don't have any sheets defined for this particular information. So what we'll do is we'll actually go to the sheet section and quickly create a sheet, right? Now, let me refresh this. Now, let's create a sheet called leave type master. When you create the sheet called leave type master, the interface gives you an option to start defining what the sheet should contain. Now, your entire data modeling could be done using the sheets on the platform itself, and also create a schema of your choice, and configure these tables in a click of a button, or possibly by copy pasting the data from the Excel sheet directly. Right now, this is the lead type master table, which is right now empty. But what we need to do is we need to populate the data onto the sheet. So now there are two options of doing it. One is either you add these columns manually here, so which will be leave type. It automatically generates a unique name for me of the column. This is the leave type, and I can go on adding more controls, like this is a number for me, so it has to be a number, because that's the limit I will have for the number. So I'll say this is the limit, say leave limit, and save it. Then let's have just two columns here. So what we do next is populate by adding the data manually. Say for example a casual leave, and the limit for the year for me is say 20 days. Add more rows by the clicking of button called plus row here. This is casual leave without pay. Then this is some 15 days for the year for me, or it could be work from home. Then there is a limit for work from home, say possibly 30 days in a year, something like that. So what we have is a quick table created by adding the data manually. So you could add the data by copy pasting this from a sheet which you've created. Say for example, you want to create a sheet called medical, a data called medical leave, and the number would be for medical leave is 50 days for the year, right? So you want to add this data. So what you do is you create the table in the Excel sheet completely, then go to the sheets, click on the tab, or the column, or the row where you would want to paste this. Just do a control C and a control V, and your data will be posted or pasted on the sheets.
This conference will now be recorded.
Once you enter all the data you need onto the sheets, you can actually save the sheet or the table. Now, the data could also be fetched from the backend interface, or the legacy database, or a legacy infrastructure element, and synced up with sheets by building certain custom sync scripts or programs which will sync up the database. So let's save this and then get back to our um, screen where we are designing our application. Now let's just refresh this so that this takes into effect the new table which we've created, because this will bind the data with the table in real time so that any changes which are done onto the sheets would be reflecting onto the application in real time. So now, for example, let's say click on a button called F here. So when you click on F or the function, it'll allow me to populate or put in certain formula to populate this particular control. So I'm going to use most prominent formula, as I said, called lookup, and I'm going to enter the data. But before I do that, let me just give you a quick overview of the formula we have. So all of the formulas in the system are pretty simple Excel-based kind of formulas, which any user could basically learn them or basically go through them by going through the documentation given along with the platform, and come to know about using such controls or such formulas. Now this also gives you a definition and also a quick example of how to use this particular control or the formula. So this is lookup, and the name of the sheet is leaf type master, and the field which I want is leaf type master dot leaf type. So the system also does an auto suggest by giving you the field names so that you can actually click and choose them from without having to type out everything. Now, without if I want to select the entire column, I just write the column name. But if I have a filter criteria, then I would basically have to put in a comma and type the filter criteria. Say, for example, if the leaf type limit is 20 or something, so filter out that particular row or those particular rows, and choose that column and show the values. But I'm not going to filter anything here. I will fetch the data from leaf type master and all the the items in the column called leaf type. Now, what's default selected value? I'm not selecting any default value, so I'll just delete this. Once I enter this, I have to save and validate whether this works well. Now, this gives you a quick output of what all data it has fetched from sheets when you've saved and validated. So this is the data I want: the casual leave, leave without pay, work from home, and medical leave, right? This is what we have. Now, close this, and this is ready to be used. Now, what you have done is populated a control called Dropdown. So the moment you choose the control or choose the option from the drop down, enter the from date and to date, you can go for submitting the data. Now, for submitting the data, you would have to perform certain operations in terms of whether the data has to be stored back on sheets. It has to go to an API on the backend, call an API on the backend, and submit the data to that particular API on the backend. Or it could just basically have to be redirect to a URL or something like that. Now, in this case, it is also important to note that all of the actions performed on a particular screen are getting logged onto a default created submit log, which we call as a sheet, which gets all of this data stored when the user enters and creates it. If you haven't created this table yourself, so it'll choose the name of the sheet by with identifying the screen name, and then for each of the controls which you have added onto the screen, it will create a corresponding column on the sheet. Say, for example, from date has a column called from, to date has a column called to. So the moment you save it, these new columns will be created the moment you publish this application, and all the data when you submit as a part of this application will store in that particular sheet. Now, there are a couple of rules which you could add, or the client validations you could add in the section called rules here. So the moment I click on rules, a new window will open up for me to configure some rules in this particular operations. Uh, in the rules section, this basically governs with respect to client validation. Now, the client validation would be very simple validations on whether the from date is less than to date, or if the input field contains any numericals, or any client-side validation you would want to do before submitting the data to the backend. All of those could be configured using the rules here, right? So, for example, I'm adding a new condition for the verifying if say for example from is if from is say from is after the field uh, 2, okay, then if the condition is true, then I am basically uh, doing a hide and show control for any other controls I might have. Say for example, let's do this the other way. Let's not save this. Let me add a user to enter the number of days he wants to take a leave for the chosen category. So I'll have a number input box here, and then I'll call this as say for example, enter the number of casual leaves. Okay, so assume that you are planning a casual leave, though the from and to will calculate this data, but for showing how this actually works, I am using this particular field to show you the conditional visibility. So by default, we'll make this control as hidden, and go to rules and add a condition that if number of casual leaves, this particular control, if the value which is put here is greater than, say for example, the value 10, okay, if the value is more than 10, then what I do is all right, so we'll do another validation. So if the select leave type is essentially uh, equal to the value casual leave, then we can choose to hide, or basically first show a control called enter the number of casual leave. So we'll show up this control if the selected value on the leave type, or the drop down is for select leave type, which is casual leave. So if it is false, let's choose to hide this. All right, so simple. So if somebody selects casual leave, this particular control gets visible. Otherwise, it gets invisible. So let's save this condition. Close this. For you to check whether this works, there's an option for preview here. So this gives you a quick option for developers to debug on the operations here, instead of loading the entire code onto a simulator or onto the device, etc., which will consume time. Now let me see which is the one I'm going to select. Say for example, first, to let you know that there is no control here to select the casual leave. Now I've selected casual leave, but the moment I click on casual leave, I get to see enter the number of casual leaves as an input for me here, right? Again, if you select something else, you will actually see that disappearing because we have configured the visibility control that way. Okay, that's the use of conditional visibility. The rules also has a validation section wherein you can actually do a from date and a to date validation. So from date, you add a validation for from date if the from date is say after say a field called 2, which is the true date, then you display an error message saying from date must be after, or say must be before to date, right? So it's something like that. So you can save it and then validate it on the client side itself without having to code anything for this. So this is about conditional visibility and validation. Now you've added the data, the added some logic based on client side validations. Now for you to perform operations based on clicking submit button, what should happen to the data? Say for example here, a simple workflow which would mean that the data which you submit essentially has to be created as a request for an approval, which has to go to my manager or my supervisor, who has to review this request and basically approve this as a workflow. So the system has an inbuilt business process management tool called workflow. Okay, so workflow gives you an option to create your own workflows by again a visual interface. Let's see how we could do that. So the workflow name for this could be a leave workflow, and this could be um request and approval of leaves, right? And we create the workflow. So this is the leave workflow which has got created, and it gives me a blank canvas with a start and an end locations with a plus icon in the middle for me to start creating what we call as tasks. Okay, so everything here, all the operations are governed by tasks. Let's see what are the kinds of tasks which can be added here. Now when I click on the plus icon, this interface asks me on what sort of a action I need to create here in order to take this process forward of the leaf, right? So the most important task in the case of leave approval for the present circumstances is an approval task, a simple approval task, wherein I click this as an approval task, and then I go next, and okay, so let's give the task name. This is leaf approval. And then when to execute is all the while, because I want this to go to my manager in every case. If you want to add certain conditions, like, if the request is, matching certain criteria, then you can actually, enable this task to be executed, or possibly disable this task to be executed. Now, this is a simple approval task, which on clicking next will take me forward and then ask me to give me the name of the supervisor which it has to assign to. But before going that, let's look at what are the other tasks available. So other tasks available is an input form, an update sheet kind of a task, a notification wherein you will send notifications. Branching of the tasks is essentially creates multiple branches of a task, wherein you can add multiple tasks at same level, which gets executed sequentially from left to right, and will exit that particular level after the completion of all the tasks in that particular level. Uh, the update sheets could be added to each of these branches. Of course, all of these tasks could be added to these branches here. An update sheet essentially just updates a particular sheet with the data which you have fetched, or taken from the comments of a particular approvals, or comments from an input form, and the sheets could be respectively updated. Input form essentially seeks input from the user and doesn't do any approval tasks, but just seeks input from the user in terms of the data which the user want to input in the form of either the controls, or typing the data, etc. Another most important task here is calling of an API. Now here, since I have submitted the task, or submitted the data, I am actually seeking an approval. You could essentially have a API called if you have already implemented your workflow with a an enterprise BPM tool, which you have it in the backend, and it exposes an API, and it just expects the input from your side, and it takes care of the rest. Just call an API and post the data onto the backend, right? Now, since we have designed the sheets ourselves, now we can define this as an approval task, and we do this approval task, and then I can say directly to individual users, because since there are no users here, it doesn't show up any users. But the moment I have many users configured and defined as supervisor, you can actually assign this task to some of the individual users and click done. So the moment you click done, this will actually create a task for me, and the workflow gets executed based on the flow chart kind of thing, which you will actually go with the conditions for each of these tasks. So that's about the workflows. And the moment you have all of these figured out and the application is verified, what you can do is you can actually publish this onto a device or onto the a container, DronaHQ's container application, and then verify how it actually looks on the phone. So you can do a quick publish and see if you want. And another option for publishing here is to export the code out. Since this is the demo account, I do not have the rights to export the code, but you can export the code for any finer enhancements or controls you would want to incorporate. For publishing of the data, you can put in release notes. This is a initial release, and then publish this particular application. So the moment you publish this application, what happens is you go to your app, the DronaHQ's container, which you have downloaded from the internet. So the DronaHQ's container is a one-time downloadable native app, which will host these applications or micro applications, which we call, which will be created using either the DronaHQ's SDK or the DronaHQ's low-code development studio. So this is the one which I have downloaded one time. So what I'll do is I'll open this application. The moment I do so, all of the requests, all of the applications which I keep developing, I can keep publishing as micro apps within this container application or a native application. So this gives me a flexibility to do a hot upgrade, and the user need not re-download the entire application if I publish a new service, say a sample app like this. So this is the one which we have defined. This doesn't, of course, contain much of a logic, but this is how it looks on the device right now. Okay. Um, right. So this is about the introduction to DronaHQ, and thank you, and let's meet in the next session, talking more about other features and the way to create the applications. Thank you.